What's going on, guys? Welcome to the video. Now, following on from the treachery in Parliament yesterday regarding the Letwin amendment that forced the Prime Minister to request an extension to the Article 50 process until at least January 2020. The Deputy Speaker has come out once again in the Telegraph to call out the disgraceful Speaker of the House, John Bercow. This Remoaning turd allowed the Letwin Remoaner amendment to be heard yesterday, forcing the government to delay the meaningful vote on its deal, and also, as I said, forcing Boris Johnson to send the surrender bill's extension letter, which he did unsigned and accompanied by his own personal letter stating the government do not want any delay and how it would damage the UK and EU's future relationship should an extension be forced upon us. So, well done Boris on that one. I don't like the deal, but I'm glad he has come out telling the EU that delay will damage our future relationship, among other things. It's about time a Prime Minister stood up for the UK, so well done Boris. Now, not only is the Deputy Speaker calling him out for straying from the rule of law, but the Mail is also calling out the fact Bercow has been plotting with Remoaners like Grieve, Philip Hammond and Oliver Letwin, among others, for the last 9 months at least. So it seems the fact that these traitors might have colluded with the EU to draft the surrender bill tabled by Hilary Benn might not be the end of it. The Mail is running the story with the headline, "A furtive visit to John Bercow's lair, 9 months of plotting and Philip Hammond's loathing of Boris Johnson. How the plot by Tory Remainers to sabotage Brexit dates back to January." The plot by Tory Remainers to sabotage Brexit was first hatched in the early days of January, as the Mail on Sunday revealed, when Grieve, one of the highest priests of the party's pro-Brussels faction, had slipped into the grace and favour apartment of Commons Speaker John Bercow. The furtive meeting came just hours before the Speaker discarded centuries of tradition to allow the former Attorney General to table an amendment to wrest control of Brexit from Prime Minister Theresa May, so kick-starting 9 months of guerrilla warfare by the Rebel Alliance to frustrate the drive to leave the EU. The day after Mr Grieve was spotted leaving Bercow's plush Commons residence, he joined forces with Labour, the SNP and Liberal Democrats to defeat his own government by forcing Mrs May to set out her plan for averting a no-deal Brexit after losing a crunch Brexit vote, leading furious colleagues to describe it as a Remainer stitch-up with the Speaker, something that has happened many times since, yesterday being one of them. Emboldened by their new power in a paralysed Parliament, the rebels struck again and again to stymie both Mrs May and then Boris Johnson's drive to respect the result of the 2016 referendum, leading to last month's astonishing denouement when 21 Tory rebels lost the party whip for voting to stop a no-deal Brexit. Mr Grieve's manoeuvres triggered fury in his Beaconsfield constituency. His association chairman was bombarded with letters of complaint, with one member saying that he would hurl rotten tomatoes at Mr Grieve if he tried to run for election again. Others urged him to retire to his holiday home in Brittany. The behaviour of Mr Bercow, who has a family car that displays a bollocks to Brexit sticker, enraged pro-Brexit MPs who accused him of overriding the advice of his officials and ignoring his duty to be impartial. That's not an accusation, it's a known fact. Let's be honest, Bercow has done everything he can to not be impartial. The government chief whip at the time, Julian Smith, confronted him in his chair and accused him of overturning precedent and defying the referendum result. In April, this newspaper also revealed that Mr Bercow had abandoned plans to announce his resignation that month after being persuaded to stay on by Anti Brexit Tory MPs. Mr Bercow ripped up his intended statement, which was to declare that he was finally making way for a successor after 10 years in the job. After coming under huge pressure to stay put from pro-Remain MPs, the news was greeted with dismay in Downing Street. One of Mr Bercow's friends told this newspaper the MPs put him under huge pressure not to leave the chair until Brexit is sorted. He is now unlikely to give any hint of his going until after the summer recess at the earliest, and may well wait to see if the new October 31st deadline is met before hanging up his boots. Ken Clarke, who John listens to more than any other MP, was a particularly decisive voice, telling him that it was his duty to stay. But after Business Secretary Andrea Leadsom announced in the Mail on Sunday last month that the Conservative Party would defy convention by putting up a candidate against the Speaker in the next election, meaning he would be almost certain to lose his seat, Mr Bercow finally bowed to pressure and announced that he would step down at the end of this month. Good. Imagine it takes the Tory party threatening to put a candidate up to get rid of this clown. Unbelievable, and goes to show how undemocratic he actually is. Talks about the law while ignoring it himself. After Mr Johnson became Prime Minister in July, the Remainer rebels stepped up their campaign against the government's attempts to concentrate minds in Brussels by vowing to leave at the end of October with or without a deal. Former Chancellor Philip Hammond, who quit the government when Mr Johnson was elected, became the de facto leader of the Rebel Alliance, drawing on his contacts from his time at the Treasury and the Foreign Office to help Mr Grieve and Oliver Letwin draft the Benn Act, which forced Mr Johnson to delay Brexit if he couldn't reach a deal. Colleagues of Mr Hammond claimed that he was motivated by a toxic personal loathing of Mr Johnson rather than a burning dislike of Brexit. I'm not surprised. It does seem like a lot of these Remoaners suffer from far more Boris derangement syndrome than they do Brexit derangement syndrome, but that could just be my opinion. The law was immediately dubbed the Surrender Act by Number 10 and absolutely everyone else who heard about it, where officials say they have evidence that the legislation was drafted with the assistance of EU bureaucrats and foreign governments, which is something I reported on a while back. In a tension statement released to this paper, a senior Number 10 source said that the government is working on extensive investigations into Dominic Grieve, Oliver Letwin and Hilary Benn, who tabled the bill, and their involvement with foreign powers and the funding of their activities. Governments have proper rules for drafting legislation, but nobody knows what organisations are pulling these strings. Yes, these investigations need to be stepped up. We will demand the disclosure of all details of their personal communications with other states. The drafting of primary legislation in collusion with foreign powers must be fully investigated. Yeah, you're not wrong, it must be fully investigated. Mr Johnson said that there were real questions about how the primary legislation was drawn up. Mr Hammond insisted that it was categorically untrue that he had drafted any legislation with the help of the EU, and Mr Grieve claimed the allegations were ridiculous, adding the tone of these statements comes across like the propaganda of a totalitarian state, which is amazing since Boris doesn't have a majority to pass a law that says he could take a piss. So, no. It's not a totalitarian state, is it? It's someone that thinks that MPs have been colluding with the EU and going behind the government's back, and by extension the country's back, you fucking traitor. Yesterday's astonishing scenes in the Commons when Mr Letwin moved to force Mr Johnson to send a letter to Brussels asking for an extension were the climax of the Rebels' 9-month campaign. When we revealed last week that Mr Hammond, Mr Grieve and Mr Letwin were plotting to sabotage Mr Johnson's Brexit by forcing him to delay Brexit beyond October the 31st, even if he agreed a deal with Brussels, Mr Hammond wrote on Twitter, "The Mail on Sunday is wrong." So, when the Mail call him out and point out that they plan to do this, Hammond comes out and says the Mail on Sunday is wrong, and hey presto, 6 days later, guess what? The Mail on Sunday was proved right. So, maybe the Mail on Sunday do, from time to time, get things right. Shame the Guardian can't do the same thing, eh? On the contrary, when Mr Letwin laid down yesterday's amendment, attempting to force the Prime Minister to do exactly that, Mr Hammond was revealed as one of the leading signatories. Obviously, of course he would. Mr Hammond was maintaining his militant line yesterday, writing, "I haven't come this far to avoid no deal in 2019 to be duped into voting for a heavily camouflaged no deal at the end of 2020. Sir Nicholas Soames said he would vote in favour of the deal and that his other 20 colleagues who had the whip removed would by and large vote for it. The rebel group, which also includes former Pensions Secretary Amber Crud, was bitterly split about whether to support the deal, with one prominent member warning that it looked like a pretty hard Brexit for Great Britain, even if it amounted to a very, very soft Brexit for Northern Ireland. There was more of a consensus that Johnson should be forced to delay Brexit by supporting the Letwin Amendment, but as public anger grew over their stance, one by one they fell in behind the government's line in the end. Well, there you have it. The Mail on Sunday are at least on the job and exposing these traitors for the worthless shit weasels that they are. How these Remoaner MPs get away with this is beyond me. The government needs to come down hard on these arseholes, so hopefully the government's investigation into drafting of the Benn Act or Surrender Bill can bring back some real evidence against these low-life traitors. The fact that they have spent 9 months working to stop the democratic vote is an absolute disgrace and should really be a criminal offence in my opinion. Elected by us it seems, but they cannot be held responsible by us when they go against what we want. There is definitely something wrong with that. Let's not forget that there are also reports John Bercow won't allow a meaningful vote on the Boris Johnson deal tomorrow, once again showing his Remoaner credentials in another bid to stop Brexit altogether. We need a general election to clear these septic spots on the arse of humanity out of Parliament and down the job centre where they belong. But it goes to show how bad it has got. This treachery is at least 9 months in the making, and that is just for the latest round of it. We all know it's gone on for 3 years, but this plot has been hatched over at least the last 9 months, with the Speaker of the House, John Bercow, complicit throughout. They all moan about Boris breaking the law, while they run around acting as if they are above the law and doing what they want. This Remoaner Parliament is the true dictator, and it's shooting itself in the foot because it's only making Boris Johnson more popular and making more and more people support Brexit and be very much anti-Parliament. So well done, Remoaners. Now you can all sit there and Remoan some more. Well, I'm going to end the video there, guys. I want to thank the channel's PayPal, Patreon and Subscribe Star members for supporting the channel, along with everyone who watches my videos. Remember to let me know what you guys think down in the comment section below. Leave a like, subscribe with the notification bell and share this video as it helps the channel a lot. And I will see you all in the next one.
Parliament is a dead parliament. It should no longer sit. It has no moral right to sit on these green benches. They don't like the truth. Twice they have been asked to let the electorate decide upon whether they should continue to sit in their seats, while they block 17.4 million people's votes. This Parliament is a disgrace, but they're too cowardly to give it a go. But the time is coming. The time is coming, Mr. Speaker, when even these turkeys won't be able to prevent Christmas.
Owners, the peasantry against the feudal barons, colonies, Mr. Verhofstadt, against their empires, and that is why Britain is leaving. And it doesn't matter which language you use, we are going, and we are glad to be going. We're off.